Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're not just doing a standard book summary of William Golding's Lord of the Flies. No, we're treating this classic survival story of stranded schoolboys more like a psychological crime scene. Using real academic research, deep philosophical frameworks, and even some personal insights from Golding's own family, we're going to unpack exactly what this little island tells us about the absolute darkest corners of human nature.
It all kicks off with this really terrifying core anxiety. Are we actually as civilized as we think we are? I mean, are our manners and our empathy hardwired into our DNA? Or is civilization just this fragile, paper-thin mask that's totally ready to slip the absolute second our survival is threatened? Keep that tension in the back of your mind as we step onto the island today. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start in a deceptive paradise, unpack the symbols of civilization, and then test out the Veneer Theory. After that, we'll explore the story as a biblical allegory before finally revealing the author's true intent. Let's get right into it. Section 1. A Deceptive Paradise. The illusion of a tropical haven. You know, the setting of the story is just a complete masterclass in irony. You have a group of British schoolboys fleeing a literal nuclear war, and they crash land on this pristine, totally deserted island. There are no adults telling them what to do. There's abundant fruit, crystal clear fresh water. On the surface, it looks like an absolute utopia. But as we're going to see, that paradise is a complete illusion. The chronological timeline of their time on the island is just a rapid-fire descent into total chaos. It starts with a crash. They're frightened, sure, but they're hopeful. They hold this big assembly with a conch shell, really trying to set up a democratic society. But pretty quickly, paranoia starts creeping in, breeding this massive split in the tribes between the fire builders and the hunters, and the whole thing culminates in absolute horror with the murder of Simon, where these boys, just whipped into a primal, terrifying frenzy, literally tear apart one of their own in the dark. Now, what's really fascinating is that this descent isn't just good fiction. It maps perfectly to real-world ecological and psychological breakdown. Looking at real academic research, we see that the boys don't just survive in nature, right? They try to completely conquer it. They divide up the land, they accidentally burn down parts of the forest, and they sensuously slaughter the local wildlife. The physical destruction of their beautiful island paradise is a direct mirror to their own internal psychological rot. Section 2. Symbols of civilization: conch, fire, and paint. Golding doesn't just broadly tell us society is collapsing. He brilliantly anchors that collapse to very specific, tangible objects. The physical destruction of these items directly tracks the death of their little society. Take the conch shell, for example. It represents the rule of law. So, the moment it's shattered, democracy literally dies with it. Then you have the signal fire, which is their hope for rescue and connection to the civilized world, but that gets abandoned just for the pure thrill of hunting pigs. Piggy's glasses? Those represent intellect and reason. When the hunters steal them, reason is left entirely blind. And then there's the face paint. Now, this isn't just kids playing a game. This paint acts as a mask that completely strips away their civilized identities, giving them this anonymous, terrifying freedom to let their most violent impulses just take the wheel. This whole internal war is perfectly personified by the two main leaders. On one side, you have Ralph. He's the democratically elected voice of reason, desperately pleading for rules, shelters, and rescue. And on the exact opposite end, there's Jack. Ironically, he starts as a proper church choir boy, but he rapidly devolves into a ruthless dictator. Jack essentially weaponizes the boys' fear of this imagined beast, promising them meat and protection in exchange for their absolute, unquestioning loyalty. It is literally the human psyche split perfectly in two. Section 3. The Veneer Theory, the fragile mask of society. This is the point where the story really shifts from a gritty survival adventure into a profoundly deep philosophical experiment. When we view this through the lens of deep academic and literary analysis, we can test out what's known as the Veneer Theory. Basically, this suggests that human goodness and civilization, they are nothing more than a thin, fragile outer polish, a veneer. And underneath that polish is a primal, self-serving chaos that's just waiting for the exact right conditions to break out and take over. We can actually map the boys' behavior directly to the core concepts of classical philosophers. Think about Thomas Hobbes. He famously believed that life without strict authority was just a war of all against all. And wow, do we see that the literal minute the adults vanish. Then there's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who argued that society actually corrupts our innate goodness. That perfectly mirrors how the boy's initial, innocent excitement completely rots into moral decay. And finally, Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is entirely embodied by Jack. He completely abandons any sense of mutual cooperation, going straight for absolute fear-based dominance. Section 4. A Biblical Allegory. Eden Lost. If we peel the onion back even further, we uncover an incredibly powerful Christian allegory that scholars argue is simply impossible to ignore.
The whole narrative closely shadows Judeo-Christian salvation history. Think about it. This pristine island is essentially the Garden of Eden, which is very quickly corrupted by human sin. The imagined snake thing the little kids are terrified of, that mirrors Satan. The absent adults represent the total loss of God. Well, actually, more specifically, the loss of divine guidance in general. And then we have Simon, who is our clear Christ-like figure. He feeds the younger children, he's deeply prophetic, and he's the only one who truly understands that the beast isn't some monster hiding in the woods, it's actually inside them. Tragically, just like many religious prophets, the second he tries to deliver this ultimate truth, he is violently struck down by the mob.
The craziest part? The allegory is hidden right there in the title of the book. Lord of the Flies is the literal English translation of Beelzebub, who is known as the Prince of Demons in the Bible. So when the boys mount that rotting, fly-covered pig's head on a spike, it isn't just some gruesome hunting trophy. When Simon hallucinates that the head is actually speaking to him, it confirms the horrifying central truth of the story. The devil isn't an external monster. It's a manifestation of their own inherent sinful savagery. Section 5. The author's true intent, beyond little devils. To wrap this up, let's step out of the academic and religious frameworks for a second and look at the real-world perspective of William Golding himself.
There's a fascinating quote from Golding's daughter, Judy, that totally pivots our understanding here. It's so easy to assume Golding just thought all humans were naturally evil, right? But she notes that her father actually distrusted simple judgments like that. I mean, think about it. He deliberately gave the dictatorial Jack incredibly strong, attractive leadership qualities. Under normal, everyday circumstances, Jack and Ralph might have been great friends. Golding wasn't just pointing a finger and calling humanity evil. He was issuing a really stark warning about how desperately we need legal structures and rules to protect us from ourselves, especially when you remember he wrote this against the terrifying backdrop of a nuclear war. Without those legal and societal structures, the boys are left to suffer completely unchecked from what Golding called the terrible disease of being human. At the very end of the novel, a pristine naval officer arrives on the beach, totally expecting to see some British kids playing fun survival games. Instead, he finds these filthy, bloodthirsty savages who literally just hunted their own friend. The boys drop their weapons and just begin to sob. But here is the kicker. The officer doesn't represent a happy, triumphant rescue. He is the devastating reality check of a civilized world witnessing this human disease up close. Those boys aren't crying with joy because they're saved. They are weeping for the permanent, tragic death of their own innocence.
I want to leave you with a thought today to challenge your own morality. We're all sitting comfortably right now, governed by laws, protected by society. But if all those rules were just stripped away today, what would you become? Would you desperately hold on to the conch shell like Ralph, or would you slap on some face paint and start hunting like Jack? Because the truly terrifying brilliance of Lord of the Flies is the realization that the darkness they found on that island is the exact same darkness that lives inside us all. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.